the nation's heartland. You're listening to Mundo in the Morning on 95.7 FM, KCMO Talk Radio.
Patrick Tuohey of the Show Me Institute is here on KCMO and also kind enough to fill in yesterday for Kevin Keatsman Uncanceled. He had a fun show talking a little St. Patrick's Day and also history in Kansas City as it relates to the Irish. Patrick, good morning. Great to have you on the show. I learned plenty yesterday, so good job, my friend. Thanks for doing it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much, and good morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about, let's just put a bow on St. Patrick's Day. Your second guest, and I'm blanking on his name, but he was really good talking about the history of the Irish in Kansas City. What is, for anyone who missed it yesterday, when you think about the Irish and Kansas City history in general, what should be the takeaway? What's the story?
Well, it looks like we all started getting here in the 1840s, and Pat O'Neill was my guest. He's well known to Kansas City Irish, having run the Irish Fest for 20 years now. And, it wasn't necessarily just for the railroads. A lot of the bluffs in downtown Kansas City by the river had to be dug out, and that was laborers brought from the East Coast, often Irish immigrants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, good job yesterday. We appreciate you doing it, my man. So you've got a piece in the Kansas City Star headlined, Kansas City's earnings tax is a regressive giveaway to big corporations. The 1% earnings tax on people who live or work within Kansas City, Missouri limits will have to be renewed coming up on April 7th. Now, this thing, it seems like, always passes with flying colors. I know you're hoping that maybe it won't this time around. What's your case in 2026?
Well, I'm writing for the Kansas City Star, so that is a left-of-center audience, and there were 2 points that I wanted to drive home. The first is that tax policy, such as the earnings tax, affects business and individuals' decision on where to move, where to locate. We've known lots of people, yourself included, for example, who have left the city. The earnings tax isn't always the only reason, but it is one of those reasons, and I want people to understand that. And the second thing I want people to understand is that this is a regressive tax. It is taxed on the first dollar you earn. You may have a federal exemption if you're a low-income worker or a low-income household, but the city still wants its 1%, and it enables the city to lavish all sorts of subsidies on wealthy developers. So it's a reverse Robin Hood tax. And if you're a progressive and you're reading the Kansas City Star and you're concerned about this type of inequality, you should be horrified by the earnings tax. And you're right, I'm confident it will pass, but I want people to be maybe a little bit more aware of how Kansas City operates, and it's unjust.
So how does the earnings tax allow them to be more generous with subsidies?
Sure. So although the earnings tax often makes up a small portion of the subsidies they give out to developers, it does allow a source of income to the city, and then they turn around and offer subsidies that are often sales tax, sometimes earnings tax, property tax. Mm-hmm. And if the city didn't have an earnings tax, it would be much more protective of its sales tax revenue, its use tax revenue, its property tax revenue, and again, try to run a tight ship, just like municipalities all over the area do. They're all able to run and deliver services, sometimes better than Kansas City's without an earnings tax. And what the earnings tax does is it kind of supports this subsidy culture. We give out in Kansas City $128 million just goes right out the door, and that's from the city's own budget. That doesn't include the school district or the mental health fund. The $128 million a year to give to, the J.E. Duns and the Burns and McDonald and whatever we may give to the Royals. And again, so talking to a progressive audience, I want people to understand that we tax the poor and we lard subsidies on the wealthy, and it's no way to run a city.
Now, you know what the city says, right? They're like, hey, all of your basic services are funded by people who work here but do not live here. And if you don't approve the earnings tax, well, we're going to have to find that money somewhere else, and it's going to have to come from you. So it's kind of a fear tactic that gets used. How do you overcome that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, look, the city is running a deficit, $55 to $100 million right now with the earnings tax. The problem isn't the city's revenue. The problem is that our leaders don't have any restraint And they're never going to develop that restraint unless the people of Kansas City say, no more, we want you to run a tighter ship. And again, it's going to require difficult decisions on behalf of Kansas City leaders if we phase out the earnings tax over 10 years, which is what a vote to get rid of the earnings tax would do. But if the people don't, in 5 years, we're going to be right back complaining about basic services, complaining about subsidies with an unjust, regressive earnings tax, just like we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So if people want to change, they're going to have to force the city to adopt it. And one other point, you talked about the billionaires in Kansas City Star reporting. None of those people live in Kansas City, Missouri. I wonder why that is.
Is that right? None of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nobody on that list lives in Kansas City. Now, there were some people who were listed as living in St. Louis, which does have an earnings tax, but it wouldn't surprise me if those people actually live in St. Louis County and not the city. I'll have to confirm that. But again, it's just one more incentive, and there are plenty to not live in the city. And city leaders need to understand we're in a competitive environment. We are losing population to Prairie Village, to Overland Park, Liberty, Kearney. And why is that? Because those places deliver a better product to their consumers, and we have to do the same. We can't keep whistling past the graveyard and pretending everything's fine, because it's not.
Patrick Tuohey with the Show Me Institute is here on KCMO. So Kansas City has obviously had this 1% earnings tax since 1963. It's unlikely it's going to get voted down coming up next month. But, what about the people who pay that tax who do not live in Kansas City? There's always this taxation without representation thing. But listen, St. Louis has it, as you noted. New York City has it. I'm sure there are other cities that do this as well. Is there any, out of curiosity, legal case that could ever be brought against one of these earnings tax?
Every once in a while that story comes up or that possibility comes up, and I'm sure people have decided, whether or not they wanted to pursue it based on the legal remedies. Of course, cities levy sales taxes, which aren't voted on by people who come into the city. So I can imagine there's some sort of argument that this is a legitimate function of government power. So I can't speak to the legality of it. But, what happens right now, and anyone who drives down a State Line Road can see the difference of the businesses that are on the Kansas side versus the businesses that are on the Missouri side. And it's a result of the policies, the regulations, the taxes we choose to levy. And Kansas City we're adding population, but we're not growing nearly as fast as the municipalities around us. And so we've got to rethink this. But too many politicians, to your point, are afraid of having to make those tough decisions. And so every 5 years we get the threats that you pointed out. We're going to have to cut the police, all that stuff. Never mind that our current mayor tried to cut the police years ago, and that was with the earnings tax. So the problem isn't revenue, it's spending.
Yeah, well, it's goofy, too, because you may have seen some of the videos. Every member of the city council is, putting out little video on this Together KCMO X account that I've looked at here, and every council member has their little thing, Bike Boy Bunch is talking about the bike lanes and the roads, and hey, without the earnings tax, we can't have the bike lanes. And then you got another one saying, hey, it's for community centers and youth programs and jobs, and then another one saying it's for the firefighters and the roads and the parks and the police. So it's somehow for everything, which also tells me, is it really for nothing outside of government bloat?
Well, it's crazy because I was at the Waldo Library over the past weekend to talk about this, and there was a representative of the city council who was there, and they always make the argument about road repaving and basic services, and I laughed, and the people in the audience got it. I live in Kansas City now. We don't get those services delivered in a great way with the earnings tax, so your threats kind of fall flat. I know that Prairie Village is able to deliver basic services. They pick up yard waste. That's a city service. I've got to pay for it out of my pocket. Yet Prairie Village doesn't have an earnings tax. All these places around us, Omaha, Tulsa, they're similar to the Kansas City, and yet they're able to deliver services without an earnings tax. Why can't we? And City Hall doesn't want to talk about it. And the Chamber of Commerce and all these businesses have figured out how to work with City Hall now. They don't want to change it. They're happy with the status quo. It's going to require the people of Kansas City who pay this tax to say, enough is enough, live within your means.
Can I give you a story idea as we wrap it up?
Absolutely.
All right. So this new Morton Amphitheater up in Riverside, this concert venue, they're doing like 40 to 50 shows. We're giving away tickets this week again to Hank Williams Jr. How many of those shows would have been at T-Mobile in Kansas City, Missouri? And with Power and Light District already losing $10 million a year, still after all these years, how much more damage is being done to that entertainment district? And how much is that costing or going to cost the Kansas City taxpayer? I don't know. I'm intrigued by it because it's what you always say. People are just moving dollars somewhere else. They're not creating new dollars and new revenue streams, whether it's the Chiefs going to the other side of the state line, Morton Amphitheater. Like, all it is shifting dollars around the metro, with that, which actually is a net loss for the region, to your point.
Well, and to your point, like if these were all privately funded, you and I wouldn't care, right? Because they're investing their own dollars. They're taking the risk. The reason why you and I might be concerned about the T-Mobile Center is because taxpayers are on the hook for that. We shouldn't be. We should have never subsidized that deal. But because taxpayers are on the hook, we care, and that means City Hall panics about this type of stuff when they should have never gotten involved in the free market. So I don't know the short-term answer to your question, but I think it's absolutely legitimate, and it should make people even more hesitant of this subsidy culture because you're putting taxpayers' skin in the game when we have no expertise on, these types of centers. We shouldn't have invested in them.
All right. Patrick Tuohey, good job yesterday filling in for Keatsman. Really appreciate you doing that, and great job this morning as well. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Pete. Take care.
All right. Patrick Tuohey on KCMO Talk Radio. 95.7 FM. Stream us at kcmotalkradio.com.